Welcome to a word of hope for Friday in the 15th week of Ordinary Time. My name is Father Jordan DeGuire, and I'm here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Today in the Gospel, we hear the story about a dispute over the Sabbath. Jesus and his disciples are walking through a field of grain, and the disciples are picking it and eating it. The Pharisees object, and Jesus responds. And now a typical interpretation of this passage is that Jesus encounters a sort of rigid legalism, and he opens up the rules, he relaxes them so that people can focus on what really matters. But this doesn't do the story justice. What does Jesus say in the gospel? First, we have to consider, what did the Sabbath mean for Israel? In the book of Genesis, God creates the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rests. And then when he calls his people Israel, he calls them to a day of rest on the seventh day. The Sabbath wasn't just about not working, about taking a day off. It was about imitating God, about drawing close to him, about sharing in God's own life and rest. And so when Jesus responds to the Pharisees' objections, he compares his disciples to priests in the temple who are innocent of working on the Sabbath, not because the rules don't matter, not because this isn't important, but because the temple is where God is to be found, because the temple is the place of God's presence among the people. And so for Israel, where the Sabbath and the temple were these ways of entering into God's life, Jesus is now claiming that for himself. There's something greater than the temple here. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Where for Israel, the Sabbath and temple were these places of relationship with God, now Jesus is the place where we encounter God, where we draw near to him. And by being with him, by imitating him, by dwelling with him, we're able to enter into that very life and rest of God. By drawing near to Jesus in prayer and in the sacraments, by imitating him in the way that we live our lives, we're brought into the very life of God. We become like him, and we find that rest for which we were made, that rest for which we long. How can you draw a little bit nearer to Jesus today, to become that person you were made to be, to share in that life that we were created to share in?